The title is Will There Be a Winter of Discontent? And the absolute truth, as far as I'm concerned, is I haven't got a clue. I don't know. There's been a winter of discontent for a significant period of time. It's been a very, very slow winter of discontent, where strata after strata after strata of working people are plunged further and further and further into debt, worsening job conditions, worsening housing conditions, a multitude of things that have been going on, not just for the period since the Tories were in power, but prior to that, under New Labour. We lost 2 million manufacturing jobs under Blair Brown government. So it's been a really long, slow burn, disintegration of people's living standards and conditions. I want to just read something out because I think it's ironic that it is so similar to the situation that we're finding ourselves in now. The Peasants' Revolt, also named Wat Tyler's Rebellion or the Great Rising, was a major uprising across large parts of England in 1381. The revolt had various causes, primarily the socio-economic and political tensions generated by the Black Death, COVID, in 1340, and the high taxes resulting from the conflict with France during the 100-Year War, Europe, and instability within the local leadership of London, which is exactly the situation that we find ourselves in now, I think. That happened in 1381. The leader of that movement was called Wat Tyler. Unfortunately, he should have been called Wat Starmer because we blew it and we lost it. But the similarities of labour shortages because of a plague, conflicts between the workers, i.e. peasants, and the landlords, leading to a national revolt, which we blew. And let's hope that we can learn lessons, lots and lots and lots of lessons, to make sure that the next time something like that happens, we don't blow it. The decline of British capitalism is particularly significant. That there has been, over the last 30 years, a 2/3 reduction in manufacturing capacity, 2/3 over 30 years. Every major manufacturing area has been bleached clean by the Tories and New Labour, and nothing has been brought in to replace it. Not all, but most of inward investment from foreign billionaires, foreign nations, and investments internally within Britain have been in non-manufacturing areas. And I'll give as an example one of the latest big purchases, huge sums of money spent on Morrison's, £7.5 billion on something that already exists, no jobs created. And the reality is that if you spend £7.5 billion on something like Morrison's, you will inevitably have to make money on that. And the only way to make money is to asset strip. And that's happened over and over and over again over the last 30 to 40 years. And there will be job reductions and there will be assets that are stripped. Morrison's has farms, they'll go. Morrison's have factories, they'll go. And the numbers of staff that are employed in the stores will be reduced, further adding to the problems that working class people are facing. So a 2/3 reduction in manufacturing over 30 years, and 90%, 95% of all inward investment into Britain, not in manufacturing, but in services and banking, and working people not feeling the benefit at all. That is also the situation in Europe, but not as bad. Britain is the weakest link in the chain, literally, when it comes to manufacturing and capitalist economies in Europe. Mainstream capitalist economies. In Europe, because of COVID and because of the disruption that's been caused by COVID, and we are also experiencing this in Britain, there's massive labour shortages. And that's provoked, thank goodness, a reaction from working class organisations, the trade unions. In the USA, and these were figures from today, I got today, 28,000 and rising workers out on strike. Not just one-day strikes, but balloted strikes where they could be out for weeks. 28,000 and rising. In Germany, train drivers planning a total stoppage in the whole of Europe. 95% turnout and 95% vote in favour of a total stoppage by train drivers in Germany. Construction workers, a very, very interesting, I think, dispute. The construction workers are threatening a national stoppage across the length and breadth of Germany. They've already been offered 4.4% increase and rejected it. And the main issue that they're campaigning for is payment for travel, because construction workers travel across the length and breadth of the country. And the employers are saying that could be a 25 to 30% increase in the amount of money that each individual construction worker earns. Berlin, medics balloting for industrial action, a Berlin-wide strike. Berlin housing, I put a post up a while ago, and Facebook put a warning up that it wasn't accurate, and that there was mistakes in it. The post said that Berliners had voted to nationalise all private property held by large private landlords to solve the housing crisis. Well, that's correct. They did do that, but it was an advisory vote at the same time as the general election, and the piece I put up missed that. But the reality is that the whole of the population of Berlin voted by a massive majority to nationalise large landlords. Indication that things are changing, an indication that things are beginning to move. In Italy, an aviation strike, a medic strike, a general strike called by two of the largest trade unions, a one-day general strike, and a transport strike, trains and buses. A similar situation in France with the CGT, only yesterday calling for a one-day general strike, teachers balloting for industrial action, medics balloting for industrial action. So across Europe, the situation is beginning to change, and the numbers of strikes are going up, and people are beginning to realise that enough is enough. Strikes in the UK, the whole of Scotland during the COP 36, 26, wherever it's called, the environmental conference in Scotland, no one will be able to get a train there because they're all on strike. Metro in Manchester, all on strike. Underground in London, all going on strike, balloting for industrial action. Transport drivers, bin men, thousands and thousands of cases where they're balloting for, well, not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of cases where they're balloting for industrial action and don't have to take industrial action. The employers are caving in immediately. And in many instances, giving pay rises before they're even asked for. In Britain, we have similar situations to the ones that are happening in Europe. And I think there's a thing called molecular process. It happened perfectly during the post-workers strike about 30 years ago. Post-workers, maybe it's even 40 years ago, post-workers didn't come out in the general strike. post workers were a non-militant trade union and were renowned for their non-militancy. And they had the temerity to ask for a pay rise. And they were treated in exactly the same way as the people that they despised, the dockers, who were all communists, car workers, who were all communists, according to many of the post workers. The post workers were treated in exactly the same way. And they ended up in a very, very, very bitter strike that changed that union and that changed that workforce overnight. Now, the Post Office Workers Union is one of the most militant and one of the best trade unions in the country. And a similar process will begin and has begun to take part in many, many of the other trade unions in Great Britain, and not only in trade unions, but also amongst the general population. Marx said that the different stratas were talking about Britain and talking about the British working class. Marx commented that there were many stratas of workers in Britain, and many of them didn't consider themselves as workers. Many of them considered themselves as upper middle class and middle class. For the first time in my memory, I spoke in Durham at a meeting with a junior doctor. Junior doctors are balloting in some parts of Cumbria for industrial action because of the conditions that they're confronted with. And junior doctors have led the campaign in some parts of the United Kingdom in recent years in a struggle for better terms and conditions. There are people that would never have imagined that they would be classed as workers who are beginning to realize that they are workers, that they're flotsam and jetsam, the same as the rest of us, and are being proletarianized. And that's a process that's taking place and won't stop. And one of the most militant groups of workers in the United Kingdom are teachers. And that's a group that 30 years ago would not have contemplated the type of industrial action that's taking place at present in Great Britain. The Trade Union for University Lecturers is currently balloting for industrial action and threatening industrial action in some universities where they're getting majorities of votes. This is all taking place now. Not, it might, if we're very lucky, happen. It's taking place now. On top of that, we have a situation, I mentioned earlier on, a slow burn winter of discontent. In 2008-9, 25,899 official government figures, 25,899 people used food banks. In 2020-21, so far, 2,539,000 people have used food banks. Council house waiting lists, 1.4 million people on council waiting lists, and another 1.4 million who can't be bothered because they know they'll never get a council house. And evictions in the United Kingdom running as of last week, 530,000 tenants served with eviction notices. And as soon as the government lifts the eviction halt that they've placed because of COVID, that'll go up to 1 million. And this is what we are confronted with in the United Kingdom. A 1381, only much bigger and much wider, and affecting millions and millions and millions of people. And it's across the world. It's not just happening here. The issue that we have to deal with is, how do we prepare for this? How do we prepare for 1 million people being served eviction notices? How do we prepare for 2 million 3 million people using food banks. How do we deal with the tax increases? How do we deal with inflation? How does a working class population deal with inflation? They're saying currently that inflation is running at 4.8%, nearly 5%. Well, that's a load of bollocks, and all of us know that. Because if you've got 150 quid a week to live on, and you spend £100 of that on food for you and your family, inflation's not running at 4.8%. Inflation's running at 15 to 20% because all of your money's going on the things that are going up. New cars aren't going up, new televisions aren't going up, but food is going up through the roof. So we've got a winter of discontent and a winter of brutalization coming down the line. Most of it is already with us, but not as bad as it's going to get. And I watched the news tonight, and I watched Johnson and his speech to multimillionaires and billionaires, trying to get them to invest in Britain. 2/3 of the people in the room were already investors in fossil fuel. So that's going to happen, isn't it? The hot air that he was coming out with the plans, Darryl Cousins put a piece up on Facebook that if they do the heat pump subsidies, if they do the 30,000 a year, it'll take 800 years to achieve his target. It's hot air. They haven't got a clue. They're bouncing from one crisis to another crisis. The only reason that I think action hasn't happened and hasn't taken place is Her Majesty's loyal opposition. And I think that the parliamentary party and the right wing in the party are the problem. The biggest single problem we've got. We know how to fight the Tories. We know what propaganda we can use. But as long as the party leadership refuse to engage with the Tories, refuse to engage with the lies, refuse to engage with the corruption, then we're saddled with the same problem that Wat Tyler had in 1381. Confusion amongst the leadership in London was the way that it was referred to. We have some enormous challenges coming down the road, and I haven't mentioned really climate change and the impact that that will be having on us over the next few years. And what I've mentioned are straightforward economic issues: investment, the economy being run down over the last 30 years, lack of skilled jobs, a raunchier economy that we have in Britain, banks and services, and all of the associated problems that they've been coming, and we've been predicting it. We've been saying exactly what I'm describing now would happen. Now it has happened. We've got to bend our minds as to how we operate inside the Labour Party, the type of demands that we put forward, and the type of work that we get engaged in outside the Labour Party as well. It's something that we need to be constantly thinking about and discussing amongst ourselves and then doing, because we're in for a shitstorm over the next, that's a completely un-Marxist way of describing it, and I apologise, but we're in for a complete shitstorm over the next 4 to 5 years. It's going to get much worse than it is at present. So we are preparing our arguments, our organisation, our structures to enable us to intervene in the struggle against all of the stuff that's coming down the line.